Hello and welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice. And hopefully shine some light on titles you can bring into your libraries, classrooms and onto your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. And today I'm joined by Yiting Lee and Swapna Haddow to talk about their book, Little Dinosaurs, Big Questions, which is the second in the Little Dinosaurs series published by Magic Cat. In the book, we meet Diplo, the Jurassic Kingdom's best-loved therapist, on his second adventure. The first book you may be familiar with, it talked about feelings and emotions, and this one is all about those big questions, like, does it hurt grass when I chomp it? Is it ever good to lie? And why do bad things happen? I think it's a really great book for exploring difficult questions. It's got simple exercises and activities, and the interactions between the dinosaurs in the book are all told in comic form. Yiting is a children's book illustrator from Taiwan, now based in England. She graduated from the MA in Children's Book Illustration in Cambridge School of Art in 2012. She focuses on picture books, and whimsical and often unpredictable stories are something that she loves to deliver. It's a really delicate, beautiful style of illustration, so that's something that I talked to her about today. And we've had Swapna on the podcast before. Swapna is a multi-award-winning children's author of the Dave Pigeon series, which you may be familiar with, but also done a lot of comics writing. When she was on before, she was talking about Reggie Rabbit, a book that she's done with Oxford University Press, and now back here to talk about the Little Dinosaur series. I absolutely love talking to this creative duo. Great to hear a little bit more about Yiting's background and how she approached her work on this topic. And I just think it's so interesting to be able to use comics in this way to stimulate discussion and conversation, to navigate those difficult questions. We talk a lot about that in our conversation. Here's what they had to say.
Hi, Swapna. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi, nice to be here.
Oh yeah, you're a returning guest.
I brought a pal.
It's so nice to have you both. It's great to have a returning guest. You're actually I was going to say you're the first one. There is Paul, who runs the Excelsior Awards, comes every year to talk about the nominees for the Excelsior Awards. But apart from that, Swapna, you are the first returning guest, which is very exciting.
Wow. Excellent.
I know.
I'm going to add that to my CV.
Please do. I'm sure we can get you some kind of icon for your website, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Now, as we've heard from Swapna and heard a little bit on her episode about her history as a comics reader and her background, if you're interested in that, listeners can go and check that out on Swapna's original episode. I'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. So we'll talk to Yiting first. So as we've heard in the intro, you're an illustrator and you work on picture books and comics. But I'm interested if you're a comics reader yourself. Is that something that's been in you either as a child or now? Is that something that's been in your reading diet, reading comics?
Yes, I'm definitely a comic reader as long as I can remember. So as a kid, I started reading picture books. I remember my mom bought like tons of picture books, and I think I was really lucky that I'm the only one in the neighborhood have so many picture books to read.
Wow.
Yeah. And as I grow older, my interest expand to comics. So I think comic is a great way to learn more knowledge because it can elaborate more ideas in the books. So I start to read comics, and while many of my friends in college, they read more like romance fictions, and I still love my comics. So
I love it. So you kept with it as you grew older. You still stayed strong to the comic love.
Yeah.
Is there a standalone Taiwanese comic scene, or is it a lot of imported comics? What kind of things were you reading?
When I grew up, we have more Japanese manga, so it's imported. So Japanese mangas was quite a big thing back in that time. I mean, they are still big now for sure. But as I know, Taiwanese manga are kind of growing right now. I haven't read as much as I should, but I mean, my love to Japanese manga is it's just there.
And I know that in terms of the Japanese manga titles that get translated into English, it's quite limited. Are there any titles that you were reading as you were growing up that we might know from the English translated manga? What kind of titles were you reading?
I think there's a one called One Piece. I think it's quite big.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it's on as a TV series as well.
Yeah, they have anime as well, I think. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And you're a fan of that?
Yeah, I just still remember the first time I read their first volume. I mean, it's long time ago, but I just been so intrigued by the story straight away. And it's kind of amazing to think about like the adventure of the little boy is continuing, and now I'm an adult now. The story still continuing. So it's quite amazing to think about that.
Yeah, it is actually, isn't it? And sort of going back to what kind of pulled you into comics, you spoke actually when you were talking about your love of comics that your first thing that you went to was about the story and the kinds of stories that are able to be told in comic form. So was your interest mainly led by those kind of narratives, or as an illustrator, even from that early age, an illustrator of the future, was it the images that were pulling you in as well in terms of the artistic inspiration?
I think the first impression, definitely the artwork. So I do remember I picked up quite many comics I love the artwork, and I start reading it. But I have to admit the story still is the essential bit to keep the reader keep going. I mean, I gave up many comics just because the story wasn't really intriguing enough or too complicated.
Yeah, that's so true. If you pick something up, you might pick something up because the artwork draws you in, but then if it's not got a good enough story, you're not going to stick with it, are you? That rings really true for me, from my perspective as well.
Yeah, and it can be the opposite as well. Sometimes the artwork wasn't appealing to start with, but then the story just amazing. And then for comics, I think, or manga, I don't know, it's quite interesting to see like the artists start from something, maybe their artwork wasn't that great, but then because they keep going and going, then you can see the artwork like just transform into something even better. So yeah, it's something great about comics as well.
Yeah, that's right. With those really long-running series, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm interested in you as an illustrator. How did that happen? Your journey into illustration? Yeah, what can you tell us about your kind of career path?
Okay, let me think.
Is it a long story?
I think I start my career from when I went to study at Cambridge School of Art, where I complete my MA in children's book illustration.
Yeah, it's quite a famous course, isn't it, in terms of picture book illustration. Very illustrious course to be on.
So I would say that's where I started. So after that, I just start to create illustration and picture books.
And to get to that point, were you a child that was always drawing, always into art? How did that passion? Because sometimes I think a love of drawing can be something that we have in childhood, but people kind of lose it or drop it as they grow older. And what was it that you think sort of sustained your love of illustration?
Yeah, I think I just had the habit to draw since I was a kid. And my mom she always bought tons of papers there, and I just remember I was sat down and then draw, and I think I always start with characters, and I draw a character and I always put a name there. I just need to give them a name and then start to make a story about what they are doing, maybe talking to myself, and then just draw something else. If I draw with my sister, I will probably like get her involved and then like ask her like what is my character doing or something. Just the story just happened there, I think. Yeah,
that's great. In terms of schools, what's the situation in Taiwan as you were growing up? Did you have access to comics? You spoke about having them at home, but were they part of school life as well?
Yeah, it's definitely, there are tons of comics in the library. I still remember I went to the library every day and then pick up different comics. They have some comics about history. I mean, it's much easier to learn history through comics, in my opinion. And even some comics are about mathematics, I think. I wasn't good at mathematics, but then that book kind of like led me to understand it a bit better in a different way. Yeah. And
That's
also
great.
some fictions. Yeah, for sure.
So we're here to discuss Little Dinosaurs Big Questions, a project you've both worked on for Magic Cat. So I'm going to bring Swapna in a little bit now. Can you just introduce the book to listeners? What's it about and who it's for, really, what the intended audience is?
Yeah, so Little Dinosaurs Big Questions is the second book in the Little Dinosaurs series. Last year, Little Dinosaurs Big Feelings came out, again written by me with the help of a clinical psychologist called Amber Owen, and beautifully illustrated by Yiting. Now, that book was kind of like an anthology of 10 graphic novel stories which followed different feelings, different themes of feelings, including things like anger, sadness, but also feelings like happiness and contentedness and overexcitedness, kind of things that aren't so commonly covered in the feelings.
It's quite...
books.
It's one of those things when you're working with children and the default is happy or sad, isn't it? And even with your own children, it's trying to build that emotional vocabulary, and you're like, actually there's a whole lot of other feelings that you're probably feeling instead of just happy or sad. Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea of the book was we would have these graphic novel stories, and at the end of each story there was a kind of recap of where you would feel that feeling in your body, and then a mindful exercise to go along with that feeling. And like you said, exactly that. It's to try and give children the vocabulary for how they might be feeling, because we can all identify, our tummies feel a bit wobbly, but we're not entirely sure why. So that was kind of the concept behind Little Dinosaurs Big Feelings. And so Little Dinosaurs Big Questions follows the same format and instead is questions, believe it or not. And then we cover a whole bunch of questions like, what does it mean to be fair? Is it ever okay to lie? Does the grass hurt if we stomp on it? You know, all sorts of things like that. And so there's 10 more stories, again in that kind of graphic novel story, followed by a kind of recap of themes in the story, and then a mindful activity to go along with what you might have kind of read about in the story. It's for young children, you know, kind of primary school age, those early ages. I just don't think you can ever start too early talking about these kind of ideas and getting children to think about what they value. But of course it is to be read with a grown-up, so maybe in the classroom or with a parent, because I'm really hoping it's a springboard for adults to have those conversations with children. You know, we want them to grow up to be critical thinkers, and this a generation of kids who are independent and have the vocabulary to understand what's going on in the world. And I just think, you know, these issues feel big, these questions feel big, and sometimes you feel like you don't have the answer, but that's not what this is about. It's about having conversations. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm hoping. I'm hoping it's a shared book between adults and children. Yeah, I think it's a really great resource. I love it. I think it's a really interesting kind of mix of fiction and non-fiction. You've got kind of fictional scenarios, but really it's about sharing information as well. So it's kind of that, and it sits in that kind of crossover space. How was that for you as a writer, kind of approaching the writing and getting that blend of kind of fact and fiction?
Well, obviously the themes are non-fiction, but it's so much easier to relate those kind of big themes to children with a fiction story. So most of the stories, they are dinosaurs, but they are relatable stories. So, you know, there's a story about someone being mean and whether we should be nice to people who are mean to us. And, you know, one of the dinosaurs pushes over the paint pots of another dinosaur, and, you know, kind of relatable stuff that, you know, every child will understand in the classroom, someone being a bit mean or a bit clumsy with stuff, and should you be nice in that situation and help tidy up. And I'm hoping the answers aren't kind of like my worldview, really kind of like actual answers. I'm hoping it opens up an idea of, oh, well, if I do this, what does that mean? And what does that say? And if I chose this other path, what does that mean? And what does that say? So I think because
they're not all, they're all questions where there isn't really a clear-cut answer, isn't it? That's kind of the idea.
Exactly.
It's a discussion stimulus.
Yeah, exactly. So I think having the fiction story helps narrate that theme a lot easier, rather than kind of just saying, this is what fairness is. This is how we can look at fairness. This is what it means if we don't all start on an equal playing field. Rather than just being very dictatorial about what a philosophical theme is, it's much more like, subtly woven into the story in a more easy to understand way. And honestly, I've had adults come up to me and say, actually, this was a really good way for me to understand the theme behind this, rather than reading like a big textbook. So I think the fiction stories have helped demonstrate that value or that thought process.
And you've worked with, I know you've already mentioned Amber Owen, the clinical psychologist that was on the team too. I'm really interested in how that worked. Did you write the stories and then were they checked, or was it a sort of an informative thing beforehand, or all of the above?
Yeah, it kind of was all of the above. I think, I'm trying to think how this... You write these books like a year ago and you can't remember what you've done. Okay, so I think Rachel had come to me, she's my editor, and said, Big Feelings has done brilliantly. I was wondering if we had some other ideas for what we can do with another book. And so we spoke about it being big questions, and that idea came from the two of us talking together about it. And so then I sat down and I, as a parent myself, thought about the questions that I would have liked my child to ask me, or questions that he actually did ask me, or things that we did discuss. And so I wrote those all down, turned them into story forms, and finished them off with activities that we would have done together or we spoke about. And then I sent it off to Amber and was like completely panicked and said, I feel really, really scared that I would be putting out a book that's just entirely my worldview. I'm not sure that's a great, I don't think that's a great idea. Could you help me out? And she was brilliant. She helped tweak the stories. She had really great ideas for activities that really solidify things that we talked about in the stories. And it kind of worked like that. And then we to and froed for a little bit, and that was it. And then it went off to be incredibly illustrated. Yeah,
so Yiting, did you have advice from Amber too, or was that all worked out by the time you started working on the illustrations?
Actually, no, I didn't work with Amber directly at all. So what I got is like the great result from Swapna and Amber. So I just start from there. So all the conversation went through editor. I only work with the editor.
Okay, and I just had a question that just popped into my mind as Swapna was talking, which is when she pointed out that they're dinosaurs. I was like, oh yeah, they're all dinosaurs. Was that? I was just accepting them in my life that they go to school and everything. But where did that concept of it being, I know that would go back to the first book rather than the sequel, but that concept of them being dinosaurs come from?
I think Rachel came with that. I think Rachel said, I had this idea for kind of Little Dinosaurs, Big Feelings, and then we'd have these, stories that go around these feelings. Would you like to write it? And then obviously I was like, yes, please. So I think, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure Rachel came already with dinosaurs. It was kind of the concept
of the book from the start it's going to be dinosaurs. Philosophical dinosaurs, emotional dinosaurs.
Well, I think it was this kind of idea of talking about feelings has been around since the beginning of time, that kind of thing, and that whole thing. I think it was getting back to basics and learning the vocab and understanding where we feel feelings in ourselves.
And Yiting, had you already got a strong dinosaur repertoire in your illustration life, or was this like, all right, now I need to learn how to draw dinosaurs?
Exactly, that's my reaction, to be fair. When Rachel reached out, I was thinking, really? Me? Dinosaur? I drew all the animals but never drew dinosaur. But I really enjoy it, really.
I think you've done a great job there of making them full of character and very approachable, and they're gorgeous. How did you two work together then? I know when I've spoken to you before, Swapna, you were receiving the finished product, as it were, from the illustrator. Was it like that? Did you have an idea of what the visuals were going to look? I think they're really distinctive.
Yeah.
Did you have a kind of idea of how the book was going to look as a finished piece once you'd finished your writing process?
Yeah, I think so. I think also when you're working on comic strips and things like that, when you write the text, it's almost like a play. So it's sort of, it plays out quite visually before you even have the illustrations. I basically sent the text to Rachel, and then unless there was a real moment where I was like, this should be illustrated like this, or, you know, just because it kind of enhanced what was being said in the text, I didn't really say anything else. And then I imagine that Rachel gave a brief of what she was looking for in each panel, and then it went off and it came back as this stunning artwork, and I was like, wow, that was easy.
Yeah. And so Yiting, from your side, you get the script. What do you do then in terms of your process of starting to work on the illustrations? You've received this script. What happens next?
Normally, I got the brief from Magic Cat, so they will give me the conversation, and they will tell me this is the panel here, and so I will start to imagine what happened and what kind of facial expression they will have, and what kind of thing. Sometimes I like to put things at the background, things happening, like some funny things. But then, I don't know, this is actually something different from picture books, I think, compared to comics. That in the first Diplo book, I think I made the mistake to make the background too busy. So there's too many things happen at the background, but in comics form, it doesn't work that well, that it kind of distracts the reader to be engaged in the conversation. So then I just changed a bit, and then it works better. So I think that's how gradually I pick up what's the comic way of illustrating this. Then it just get better and better, and we did it quicker and quicker, I think. So that's why we can have the second book come out just within a year, I think, right?
Yeah, it was
about
very quick.
A year, yeah.
That's brilliant. And I love the kind of the style of your illustrations. I think a lot of, particularly in graphic novels, a lot of the illustrations we see in graphic novels for children are quite digital style. It tends to be the most kind of common style. But your illustrations feel very different. How do you actually go about making images? Are you working on computer at all? Are you working very much in sort of physical media? How do you make these beautiful pictures?
Yeah, you're right. The style isn't really typical in comics, I think, because I think it's because my background is doing picture books illustration, so I naturally gravitate toward to traditional media using watercolor and color pencils, which has a more rich texture and warmth to the artwork. And so when I start working this book with Magic Cat, I didn't really question my approach. I just go with it. And then the style kind of, I think it is quite works well with the story, I think.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think it's really nice as well, because I think like if children wanting to recreate those images, it's quite hard for them to get something similar to what they're seeing in a book if it's a very digital image, whereas they can create some of those same textures that they're seeing on the page. You know, they have access to things like watercolours and colouring pencils, and they can have a go. I think it feels really like something that you could use also, as well as something that would inspire conversation with the content. It's also something I think that could inspire children to do a bit of creating of their own as well.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was around your approach to some of the concepts in the book. Because it's philosophical questions, they're quite abstract things that we're talking about. It's quite hard, like fairness. Draw a picture of fairness is quite a challenge. I know it was a story to go along with that. But how did was that difficult at times for you to get that visual side to go along?
Oh, I would say it's definitely a challenge to illustrate that bit sometimes, especially the recap page and the activity sometimes, because to to use just an icon to describe what's happening there and then lead children to do the activity, I found sometimes it's hard. Most of the time, I can naturally visualize how to illustrate a concept to help children to understand. But some ideas are more difficult. And that's when I ask myself, if the content is abstract, does it need to be illustrated in a literal way? So maybe the artwork can be abstract as well. And children, they will just figure it out. And so allowing children to feel what it means rather than just process, like tell them what is the logical way to think.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think you were so clever because there were definitely things. I remember there was the recap page about when someone's mean to us and whether we should forgive them or not. And there was this image of a volcano exploding. Like things like that was so clever, illustrating, letting something go or feeling angry without drawing just like another angry dinosaur. I thought that was so clever. I really love that kind of stuff because children are very visual learners. They can pick up on things like that without needing to necessarily read the words.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having images, is that it doesn't need to be literal, isn't it? It can go so much further beyond. Really lovely. And I think you're completely right. We don't have to oversimplify things for children there.
Yeah, we definitely should trust them. They are clever.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the whole book itself, I mean, I struggle to put this down into words, but it's just so nice to have in your hands. Like it's just a lovely object as well. Like it's a nice size. There's got a textured cover that it just feels really lovely in your hand, and that all seems to complement as well, Yiting, your sort of style of illustration, that texture, and then it comes through on the cover, and it's all just gorgeous. I've got a thing for books that are particular dimensions. I just love it when they're not the normal dimensions. I love like a tall skinny book. I love a little square book.
I have a thing for hardbacks. So if it comes in a hardback, I'm like, oh, this is very nice. This is so luxurious.
And it is gorgeous. Does that then go into the hands of the publisher, the team there, in terms of making those decisions on the cover and the rest of it that makes the kind of the product, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can take zero credit for the production of these books. They are stunning. If you know Magic Cat's List, you know they put out stunner after stunner. So it's very much in their wheelhouse to have these gorgeous books. So so sadly, I can't take any credit. It just was absolutely beautiful, more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. They are probably some of my favourite books on my shelf. But
when you receive them in the post, is it almost a surprise how the finished product comes out?
Yeah, it is. It sort of is and it isn't, because I've seen the kind of mock-ups of the book and I've seen the cover as well. They've sent through the artwork for that, so I kind of have an idea. But just like you said, it's the feel of it, the size of it. Everything is just so wonderful. It feels like a classic book almost, and so it is an absolute delight to open up a Magic Cat box when it comes.
You must have a lot of books in your house. You shelf after shelf.
I do have a few books. I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to books.
Yiting, from your perspective, do you have any input into those design decisions around the sort of texture of the cover, the dimensions?
I don't get involved with the decision of how this book can be made so beautifully. But I do remember at the very beginning of the first Little Dinosaur Big Feelings, the dimension at the beginning was bigger. And and I think maybe I actually start to illustrate the first chapter, and then they kind of have a meeting and then decide to trim the dimension into a smaller size, which is right now. And I actually think it works very well in this dimension.
Yeah, I think it's lovely.
Yeah, I can't even imagine it. Like maybe picture book size, maybe that was the original, but I just can't imagine it bigger. It feels like it has to be this size.
Yeah. So I'm quite glad they make the decision to change it to what it is now. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sets it apart from picture book as well, doesn't it? It kind of feels like it's its own thing.
That's right.
Kind of
Yes.
uniqueness to it. I'm really interested in the potential of comics in the ways that they're different from picture books and the stories that they can tell because of those differences, that you can tell in comics because of those differences. And I know, Yiting, you've mentioned a little bit earlier on about the difference as a reader of exploring comics. In what ways do they lend themselves to exploring kind of quite tricky concepts like these philosophical concepts? And Yiting, if you start us off, how do you think the comic form can deal with these concepts differently than maybe if it had been a picture book or if it had just been a prose book?
I mean, before you ask this question, I actually never think about it. But now you ask, I think it's so much potential of it. I mean, even just like Snoopy dog, they ask a lot of like philosophical question.
I'm thinking of Calvin and Hobbes as well, which is
that one. That was the one. I'm really bad at remember the title, so sometimes I just can't remember it. But yeah, that one. So I think comics is actually a very good way to approach this concept. And I also remember I read some comics when I was little in Taiwan. There's one is they drew a character of a Chinese philosopher called Zhuangzi, and the artist just gave the character a really interesting personality, like a carefree wise man, and then doing funny things. But then people around him will have like give him a weird look. But then at the end of the story, children will learn why he did that. It's because something he think differently from other people. So I do remember the experience of reading it, like helped me to understand that. So I think comics definitely can have the potential of it.
Swapna, what are your thoughts on this?
I love the idea of options for children. So there'll be some who lean better towards picture books and some to comics and all sorts of things. And so having options is brilliant for me. So having both available to children. I think also with these kind of quite big themes and, big concepts, it does help for young children to see it play out in comic form, because there's something in picture books which is that you have the words, you have the illustrations, and there's a slight gap between where children and adults, whoever's reading them, have that kind of interpretation space. So they add a level to the story as well. Whereas with these kind of quite big concepts, you want to be a bit more, you want to tighten that kind of gap a little bit so that, you just kind of don't have a child going off and completely missing the point entirely. So I think this plays out almost like watching a movie when you read a comic, because every panel just kind of matches onto the last one and pushes the story on without leaving a big void which you have to fill in with your own imagination. And I think that helps portray difficult subjects and difficult stories. So yeah, I think that's what's helped a lot with this, especially because these books are aimed at quite young children. So though the words will be said to them, and though they might be hearing the words, they're going to interpret a lot from the pictures and the progression of those panels and watching the story unfold. And I'm hoping that when they come to the end of the story, they've taken what the story should have been rather than a kind of completely different interpretation on that.
It's really interesting. Like, it's sort of more of a guiding through.
Yes, exactly. That's the words I was looking for. You'd think I'd be good at words. I'm not. I am good at words if I have 3 to 8 weeks and an editor.
3 to 8 weeks lead time.
Yeah.
This has been a great partnership. We've got 2 amazing books. Is there going to be another in the Dinosaur series?
I don't know what we can say. I mean, I would definitely love to work with Yiting again. I've just loved these books.
Yeah, me too.
But I definitely don't think we can actually say anything. Things are being talked about, but it's very, very early stages, so it's not.
Little Dinosaurs' Big Secrets.
That sounds like a nice title.
Brilliant. Well, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for any future announcements about that. But I certainly really loved exploring it. I think it's a brilliant book, great resource to have in school as well as at home. It's been brilliant to have you both on. I'd like to kind of pick out something for educators to think about as we finish the episode.
Well, I would say don't be afraid. Like, these can feel like huge questions, and sometimes I think, especially as grown-ups, we feel like we need to have answers to questions. We really don't. Children don't even expect answers. They're much more open to having conversations, but I think we terrify ourselves into we need to know everything that they have asked the question to, and so it can feel really daunting to have these kind of big philosophical, well, I've said it wrong, haven't I? Philosophical, there we go. Philosophical conversations. So I would say don't be afraid. That's the whole point of the book, that the conversation is started for you. I think the main thing is to not feel afraid if you don't have the answer. You can absolutely say, you know what, I'm not sure, but let's talk through it.
Sometimes it's really hard to have a conversation of fairness when you're embroiled in a situation in which someone thinks something unfair has happened.
Yeah.
So it's it's actually quite hard to have those conversations outside of the child feeling something around that. So it's really nice to have a tool to actually, maybe, a few days' time, just come back to it. And it's not about that specific situation, but it's let's have a conversation just about the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, these are conversations you can have anytime, but particularly in the moment, it's kind of hard to find the words and you're just trying to diffuse a situation. But The hope is that you kind of have this new springboard for the conversation later when everything's calmed down. I think the most important thing is we're trying to build children who learn how to communicate well, who are able to listen, who are able to understand. And so I can't stress enough that I think these conversations need to be had earlier rather than later. And so I'm hoping anyone who's feeling a little bit intimidated about having a conversation about lying feels less intimidated now, because they have this kind of resource to start the conversation.
Yiting, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with Swapna about having the conversation. And I would even imagine the teachers or educators probably can put the class into two groups, let them debate each questions. I think that would be
so
fun.
Good. Yeah.
Because you wouldn't know, they might have a crazy kind of thought about, or they will learn to make a point about why people should agree with them, and which is a great way to try to communicate. So I think that would be fun.
That is such a good way to also teach empathy with kids, because they'll have to listen to each other. So
exactly.
There's so many ways you can use this. I'm just so glad it's out there, and I really do hope people do use them.
And I wondered if you think maybe there's a scope for children to create their own comics, explore things that happen in the school day, maybe philosophical questions, but also maybe just, the real life practical things that happen in the school day. It struck me that children creating their own comics of a similar vein could be really powerful. What are your thoughts on that?
1000% yes, because for me, the way I've understood my feelings has always involved some sort of drawing or some sort of writing down of feeling. It's such a good way to kind of unpack how you're really feeling. So I could not stress enough that kids make their own comics based on certain things that happen, or questions or feelings or whatever is going on in their lives. And a great way to start that is to lead by example. And I've often made comics with my child when he was little, and we've talked about different scenarios and things based on that, and it's so much fun, first off, but also a really amazing way to kind of touch base with your child on what they value as well. So 1000% kids making comics, I'm there for it.
Yeah, and I mean, if children have a big questions and it's not in the book, not in this book, and maybe the parents can teach the children to draw their own the next chapter of this book. They can use the dinosaurs. Maybe they will create a new characters.
That would be
that'd be
so
great to
cool.
have your own class version that you've made.
Yes,
like, in
a
your
class
classroom.
dinosaur. Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. To finish the episode, we always ask guests if they had one comic or book about comics to add to our to be read piles tomorrow. What book should we be reading next? I'm going to go to Yiting first. Yiting, what book would you recommend that we read?
Okay, there's one, I'm not sure if it's famous or popular in the UK. It's called Spike and Susie. It's a series. It's a Belgian comics, I believe.
Ooh, I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a Tintin.
Oh, cool.
Adventures between two orphans. I think they are two orphans, but they are kind of brothers and sisters. I mean, actually, it's funny to think about like now they are not raised in a regular family. I think they live with their aunt, but the aunt, I don't think they are related or something. So it's quite modern setting in a way, and I just love they have ridiculous and magical adventure every time. So when I was a kid, I really enjoy reading them. So that's my recommendation. Spike and Susie.
I'm just having a little look at the illustrations. Yeah, that's a brilliant one. I've not explored that at all, so thank you for that. Swapna, what would your recommendation be?
Well, because I'm now living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, obviously I'm bigging up all the New Zealand finds that I have.
As
so
you should.
I've gone for This Land, which I think started off as a comic series, and Scholastic have wrapped it up in a beautiful book. And it sort of takes lots of Maori legends and characters from those stories, including Maori gods and spirits, and then it brings it into like a futuristic world, and using the same characters and some of their superpowers and stuff, that they've created this thing which is so much like a Marvel comic. So if you love Marvel, this is for you. But also if you've kind of, maybe on the back of Moana, kind of heard a few of the characters like Maui and stuff like that, this is also for you, because you kind of have had your toes dipped in the water, so to speak, and now you can learn a little bit more about those legends. So
I'm just looking at the cover of book one. Looks amazing.
Yeah, it's very cool. So it's by Mark Abner. I think he lives in Scotland now, but he's originally a Kiwi. But the books are brilliant. So I finished the first one. I've got the second one ready to go, and they just really go from the first page. It's really, really fun series. So that's my recommendation.
That's brilliant. And actually the first link I've just clicked on when I was looking that up was teacher's notes to go with it as well, so there's like some
yes, brilliant. Scholastic
available.
are so good at that.
On Scholastic, yeah, they're really on it. That's brilliant. Thank you. So the two brand new things for me to explore, so thank you for that.
And can I be really cheeky, because I actually have two very cool things that I think the Comic Boom listeners might enjoy.
Please.
So at the end of July, Jess Bradley from the Phoenix Comic and I have something together. We have our first science non-fiction series coming.
Wow.
And the first one coming out is called How to Save Your Granny from a Runaway Train. And it starts off
I'm
with...
already loving this.
It starts off with a bit of a comic strip in each chapter, and then some science to go with it, and then an experiment you can do at home. And it's kind of inspired by all the lockdown science I did with my son. Because obviously we would do these things and he'd be like,
My son would
I...
love that.
Right. He was like, when would I ever need a pulley, Mum? Like, what's the point of this? And I'd be like, well, what if you need to heave a hippo out of a volcano? Ever thought about that? And so there's kind of on the back of that with real life science. And then also in September, I have my first graphic novel series for young readers coming with Minky Stapleton. It's called The Terrible Trio. It's set in a world where animals all have superpowers. And the three animals at the end of the queue when they were getting the superpowers get the worst superpowers. There's Marge, who gets the ability to make mac and cheese. There's Barry, the lemur, who gets the ability of kind of nice handwriting. And then sadly, Zeb gets the power of being a zebra that can blend in with the zebra crossing. So they've got pretty rubbish powers. And they're trying to survive in a superhero world. And Minky Stapleton's illustrations are absolutely brilliant. We're hoping for a monster launch because it's going to be published across all the Scholastic regions of the world on the same day.
Wow.
Yeah, really fun. And in a whole bunch of countries, including Mongolia. Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You make me feel tired. You must be just... How are you doing this all? Just
I just have a lot of thoughts in my head. I have a lot of things in my head that need to come out.
They both sound brilliant. We keep our eyes peeled for those, for sure. Yeah, very, very exciting.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It's amazing that you're just... how much you embrace comics and use them in all different ways. I love it. That is the end of the episode now. Thank you, both of you, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I just had such a great time.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
There you have it. A great conversation with Swapna and Yiting. It was great to talk to them and I learnt a lot. Really, really love that book. So yeah, definitely recommended from me. Thanks to ALCS for sponsoring today's episode. As you know, like today, we often have writers on Comic Boom speaking out about their work, and ALCS is a not-for-profit organisation supporting its 120,000 plus members to collect money for all the secondary uses of their work, things like photocopies, digital reproductions, and they also produce some fantastic resources to support educators to explore topics like copyright and plagiarism in the classroom. So important in this day and age, as the line is ever finer in the age of AI between your own work and other people's. So definitely something that's worth starting to explore at a young age, I feel. You can check those out on the link in the show notes. And over the next few weeks, I'll also be highlighting a few of those specific things that are available from ALCS. Now, my recommendation for this week is going to be Ditching Saskia, a book that I read very recently, published by Flying Eye. It's by John Moore with illustrations by Neatles. And it is absolutely beautiful. For first off, the cover is stunning. It's got this gorgeous manga-style illustration of a woodland on the front cover, and it's raining, but the rain is done in sort of dot varnish on the front, and it is really, really beautiful. I mean, if I read the description from their website, a heartwarming, supernatural slice of life graphic novel. That's a really good description, because there is a slight supernatural element to it, but it is really about human interaction and relationships. It says here, gently weaves together tough everyday themes of identity, grief, and accepting flaws in those we love the most. I think a great one for fans of things like Heartstoppers, but people who can take a little bit of supernatural, a little bit of kind of sci-fi. So the premise of the story is that in this world, you can purchase a flower, which you can take it to a grave and talk to someone for a few days. You're able to see people who have died. And our protagonist, Damien, goes to do that in order to speak to his mother. But accidentally, he summons Saskia, an annoying little girl who kind of follows him around for a few days. Great kind of high school relationships story alongside that as well. I really recommend it. I really enjoyed the artwork, the storytelling, and the characters. So that's my pick for this week. That's it from me. Thanks so much for listening again and for joining us back on this series. It's been great to see those listener figures rack up and see that people have got back into listening to the podcast. I'm always looking for that to grow. So please do share on whatever platforms you're on. A recommendation goes a long way. So as promised last week, we now are set up and running on Blue Sky. So you can find us on Blue Sky platform under Comic Boom. You'll also find us on Instagram on @comic_boom_podcast. And you can find us on X. That's on my Twitter feeds. That's @Lucy_Braidley. And please do, share and share away. It's great to meet new ears and people who may not be familiar with the content that's come on. We are nearing our 50th episode. Very excited about that. There's lots of content there for people to explore if they haven't come across the podcast before. So really appreciate the community of Comic Boom doing their best to get the word out there. We'll be back next week with another great episode. Lots of exciting things to cover this season. You've been listening to Comic Boom, which is hosted and produced by me, Lucy Starbuck Bradley. Thanks for listening.